welcome to Geek Out Weekly, the podcast where we geek out not so strongly on a weekly basis. I can't not say on a weekly basis. Every half fortnight? Geek out, geek out not so strongly every half fortnight. That's the ticket. It's not. It's not the ticket. What is the ticket though? Is that on today's bill we've got me, Aadil, and I'm joined, as always, by Ben.
Hello.
How are you today, Ben?
Good, man. Good, yeah.
And we are talking WandaVision yet one more time.
Mm-hmm.
I say that we covered episodes 1 and 2 because they were released sort of together.
Yeah.
We sort of talked about them that week, and then we weren't super. We had some questions and some doubts, right? I remember you,
Yes.
especially without the same background in sort of older American TV shows, were struggling a bit, and so was Kim, right?
Yeah,
You
that's
watched it
right.
with Kim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We both, I think the general consensus was that it had started off quite slowly. And you know, I can see now why they did that. But it kind of just did enough to keep us just invested to want to know what that through line was, whilst having kind of two very slow episodes, but very much built on those 50s, 60s sitcom shows.
Tropes.
So you can see why. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had seen some of them. We had a spate of watching the Dick Van Dyke Show as a family, just because it was on the right channel on the weekends, kind of thing. And so I had a bit more, I think, patience with it. Also, a lot of people like the zeitgeist was a lot of people being like, "This is slow," and I think part of it, there were some think pieces on, it's because we're so used to binge cinema that like a weekly slow boil is out of our reach, and we should remember how to watch TV again.
Yes.
And I kind of buy that, but also I just think it was paced the way they clearly wanted it. It just means that they lose people because I think they were hoping the nostalgia would be more universal.
Yeah.
But and so we sort of ended with some theories and hopes. We hoped I wanted the pivot through the decades to maybe touch other genres. Obviously, that didn't quite pan out. All the intrigue and non-sitcom feelings are sort of are now being in touch with the outside world instead of sort of odd like cutaways in the last 4 seconds, which were the first 2 episodes were. How are you feeling about it now? Sort of like general.
I suppose
3 more episodes in, so we've seen 2.5 times as much.
Yep. I think it's change of pace has helped, but also it's kept that and unveiled more of the story, the through line about kind of what's happening, introducing other characters, and has done some interesting things with the side characters as well. I'm maybe like I like it. I'm enjoying it, but I'm not kind of like, oh, the next episode is out, I must kind of watch it. You know, I'm at a point still. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll Kim and I will get together over the weekend at some point and give some time over to this. You know, it's not I have to watch this Friday night when we're both ready. When the little one's down, we'll put it on. It's kind of something that I know we'll get to over that weekend that it's been released, but we're not in a rush. So enjoying it, but not. It's kind of still not a must watch or an instant watch.
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it kind of is, but I think that's also because I'm watching It's one of the few narrative things I'm watching. One of the weird things with lockdown is I'm watching a lot more YouTube people playing games, real play D&D things. There's like the closest I've got is like 22 episode arcs a campaign,
Yeah.
and I think it's the social interaction while being a narrative that, like, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, I see. I miss conversations with people and hanging out and joking around.
Yes.
And I think that's why, like the house watches movies together, and I have started watching them, but more because it's like, I should hang out,
Hmm.
um, rather than like I just feel like not a lot of urge to watch a film unless it's with people,
Sure.
and so binge watching a show, meh. This one's got enough
Mm.
on me, partly because actually I think I credit this podcast with like making me finally watch, like, we watched The Mandalorian, and then I was like,
Yep.
right, it's good to just watch a thing. Um, and so there's been a couple shows, but overall, I think it's high on my list just because it's most of my list.
Yeah.
But again, I think my slightly more nostalgia for different eras of American cinema, growing up with cable TV, which had all these shows that were syndicated in my youth. Although they really do need to make a Highlander episode. Uh,
Might lose a
but
bit of the
yeah, so
comedy, but
yeah, so I think let's move to. So I'm just gonna quickly go through the 3 episodes,
hmm.
sort of basic beats. I'm literally gonna read the plot summaries and then use that as jumping off point. Obviously, we're gonna talk a little less on 3 and 4, just because most of the questions that they might bring up end up being answered or being further detailed questions on 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just also think it's good to sometimes remind ourselves of what exactly happened
Hmm.
because it's been 3 weeks.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we sort of ended with the beekeeper scene in episode 2, and then everything turning color,
Hmm.
and that was the end. And we're like, wonder what that is. Uh, and that segues nice into the title of episode 3, which of course is Now in Color. And so, yeah, so we get Dr. Nielsen checking in on Wanda's pregnancy and saying she's 4 months along, and everything is fine before saying he needed to leave for his intended holiday with his wife. Uh, Vision sees him out and then sees Herb, the neighbor, accidentally cutting through the wall with his hedge trimmer, which is a very classic. This never could happen in real life, but is a thing of the weird notion of 50s, 60s, or
Mm.
60s, 70s sitcom tropes, just like obliviousness and wholesome hijinks that just is improbable. Sorry, that wasn't part of the plot summary I was reading. Um, WandaVision paint a nursery while debating what to name their child. When we already get to the end of the second trimester, and then she begins contracting, and that causes like electrical devices and all kinds of things in the house to move around. Like basically, the world seems to be shuddering when she's emotionally and physically under distress. Geraldine arrives and helps Wanda deliver Tommy and Billy. There was a big deal between Vision and Wanda about whether they want to name it Tommy and Billy. Vision acquiesces to the one that Wanda wanted, but then they ended up having twins.
Yep.
But meanwhile, Vision is like running across the city to try and catch up to the doctor before his flight, so that he can help with the delivery.
Hmm.
Um, you know, not looking like Vision, but running, and then Vision also catches Agnes and Herb gossiping outside, and they talk about Geraldine, who's just arrived in town and does not have a home or family. Uh, Wanda interrogates Geraldine after Geraldine mentions Ultron and her dead brother Pietro. And that's when Wanda sort of freaks out because she's saying, outside terms, and then sees the pendant on Geraldine's necklace, which is the sword emblem, and basically uh, powers up and fires Geraldine out
Mm.
of Westview. Uh, Vision comes and asks where Geraldine is, and Wanda says she had to go. And then we cut to Geraldine literally firing out of the wall of statics surrounding Westview, and tumbling for a bit, and then being surrounded by sword agents. Um, so I thought one thing I wanted to mention on this was the fact that, like, in order to get to the doctor, the Vision runs and then picks up the doctor or runs back.
Yep.
And like here we're getting like something more than just the sitcom life is going on with respect to these characters because they're just not blinking.
Mm,
Like
mm,
half of the episode was about hiding the powers and the weird shit from Geraldine on her visit,
yeah.
and then the kids. And like that same episode is when Geraldine finds out Wanda's pregnant, and it's like, oh, weird. But like, you were trying to hide the pregnancy, then she was fine with it. Then there was baby, then there was second baby, and all of the water lines and explosions, like when her water breaks, all the water mains in all the houses apparently blow up, and like there's flooding. Uh, Hilarious. Um, but yeah, so it's an interesting beginning to wait. Why aren't they reacting? Especially because they literally put a
Yes.
hat on. We need to hide it from them.
Yeah, and it brings up an interesting conversation about, and I think we started to get into this in the last discussion we had on this. What is actually happening, right?
Mm.
Is it some kind of simulation? Is it Wanda controlling things? How that actually works? And we're finding and seeing different characters, whether it is Monica kind of as Geraldine, who has been, as we find out in the next episode, she's come in to this world a little bit later, or it's some of the other characters like Agnes. They act, all of them act slightly differently. So it kind of like there's a moment which I'm sure we'll talk about where Agnes says something because she understands what's happening within the context of the life that they now kind of live. And in this episode, she was outside and she told Herb not to say something. And he was trying to sort of say to Vision, we're trapped and that sort of thing. And she kind of stops him from saying it, if I remember that rightly.
Yeah, so
She
I think what
seems
it
to
was.
act. She acts slightly differently than the other characters, and then we see this with Geraldine, where suddenly she has some kind of thought and knows who. Suddenly it comes back to her who Wanda is, and whether that was because Wanda let her guard down a little bit after just having these kids, and she didn't sort of allow her powers to kind of radiate as much, and that, which again we'll talk about in a moment about how this is actually happening. But it's interesting to see how these different characters all react, because the Doctor was kind of like, it's almost like we were flying, and it just like brushes it off.
Yeah.
He can't go on his holiday, and again he kind of mentions something about never being able to leave. So you start to get these little bits in that episode, and obviously it introduces the twins, which is a big
Yeah.
House of M moment as well, kind of pulling that sort of storyline in, and the lead up to that kind of thing. The idea that Wanda had twins, and in that they were taken away from her, and whether that kind of plays into this sort of later on or not. But it's starting to, episode 3 very well and very much kind of starts to show you, yes, we've had these first 2 episodes, and this one is in a similar sort of vein, but we're rolling things in. We're starting to unfold lots of extra little bits and starting to play on all of those different things that you've noticed so far, starting to have a few little payoffs. Before, obviously, then episode 4 takes things in a very different direction.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point with the arc of the season and the way they released it. I think it was very smart. So it's the pivot point, and
Yes.
So when you now that we've seen 5 episodes, and you're thinking 9 episode season, you're like, people are talking about it being slow, but actually by episode 3, we've had the sort of cute, like we've pivoted genres almost. But it is still slow. It's just an interesting sort of, the way it's done is so. Why I think this is an interesting show is because it's kind of very non-standard, and in a way that I wouldn't have thought Disney would let happen.
Yeah.
So this is actually the sidebar. I think we talked a bit about it last time, but like why I'm impressed. Why I was impressed with the sort of moving through tropey decades of sitcoms was interesting. These last 3 episodes kind of put that in high gear, and it's like, oh, so Disney might be this giant conglomerate, but they also are very good at finding out what people want, and people like this type of thing. And so I'm sure this is totally cynically tested and thought about, and
Mm,
like even though this seems really unique and there's nothing in the zeitgeist kind of like this show, that it, they have enough data out there that it wasn't as big as of a risk as it seems.
sure.
That's my cynical part, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. Like I'm just glad that there's it's still a risk because it's new
Hmm.
and that they're willing to do it. And I think this episode is like, and then the next one, right, the one we're about to talk about, really shows just how this, at least this one season thing, is a thing that they're like, yeah, screw it, let's just do something big.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, let's swing for the fences,
Mm.
and have faith in the team that has sort of got us to this point.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's good as well in that, when we talked about and again on a previous episode where we were talking about the big slate of shows that Disney and Marvel are kind of putting out, and whether these would be, multi-season things. I think
Mm.
maybe WandaVision is that show that we just have that one season of. It
I kind
leads
of
into the new
hope so.
phase. Yeah, so they're able to do everything in this and go a little bit more kind of crazy and change up the format, and be able to explore those kinds of things without then having to worry about, say, season 2 or setting that up. And we might get a season 2 at some point, dependent on Wanda and Vision's involvement through phase 4, and whether WandaVision is that kind of bridging a gap between each of the phases,
Mm.
or is some kind of supplementary show kind of at the beginning, bookends a phase or something like that. But at the moment, yeah, they can just go nuts and do
Yeah,
lots of crazy
I,
stuff.
I have a feeling this is kind of like their way of introducing the multiverse type thing
Yep.
and thinking, to MCU fans.
Mm.
And especially because they're going through decades and they're running out of decades.
Yes.
I think one, and like the premise is WandaVision, like, and the vision part is very much a play on television
Mm.
and what they're
Absolutely. Yeah.
doing, right? So I think it's meant to be a one-off that's going to be, like kind of like this episode, actually, like a pivot point in
Mm.
between arc one of the MCU phase. Well, whatever. I know we're phase 3 or 4 or whatever. I just mean the up to end game Infinity War, that very concrete set of multiple phases of MCU, and then
Hmm.
the post Thanos MCU. And this feels very much like so our next big thing will be introducing it, and this is like the pivot point, and the fact that they're doing it in TV shows their commitment to making the web of all these things actually a web and not just Agents of Shield
Yeah.
one-off
Yeah.
sort
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk about the next episode. Sorry, but we interrupt this program, which is episode 4's title, which is great because, of course, this entire episode is in the outside world.
Hmm.
Which I think, again, this is why the pivot point was the end of last episode. I really liked this change up, to, especially for those who, I think this is exactly what, like, people more in your shoes
Yes.
needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it turns out Geraldine is actually Captain Monica Rambeau. I really like that her name's Rambo. And Agent de Sword, who died in the snap, which
Mm.
they now which Sword calls the blip,
Hmm.
which I kind of like that the MCU chose to have a different slang term than the actual world, because everyone called it the snap in actual world fiction consumers.
Yes.
And so just making it clear, like, so we acknowledge this thing, but what we're acknowledging is a fundamentally different thing, because in this world the blip killed people.
Yep.
In the snap, a narrative thing happened that was wild.
Absolutely. And you would imagine that Thanos and what he did was not common knowledge.
Yeah,
That's the thing,
exactly.
isn't it? It's people are like, who's Thanos? All they know is
And
that their wife or their children or someone just disappeared and went out of existence. They blipped out of existence. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a
and
really clever change up.
yeah, and it also reminds you that, like, yeah, the epistemic state of people, right? Sword and
Mm,
Shield probably specifically didn't want people to know that there's
absolutely,
a
yeah.
thing. called Thanos that could be out there, and actually anyone of sufficient alienness could redo it.
Exactly. I mean, people are already kind of thinking that, some of the Avengers and the aliens that came to New York at one point are the most powerful things that there are. To know that there's then these stones that you can just get and just think
Fucking
stuff
wreck
out of
everything.
existence would
Yeah.
just break people. So, yeah, very, very
Um.
cleverly done.
Also, you reminded me of how far we've come in the MCU, because who the fuck remembers what a Chitauri is, or why that was the big threat of the first
Yeah,
Avengers movie?
yeah.
It's still wild to me that they picked basically a random alien race for
Yeah.
Loki to kind of work with, quote unquote. I kind of get it, because it's like, if it didn't work, if it does work, we aren't losing a race
Hmm.
to do a better movie for.
Yep.
Um, Also, at the end of that one is when we see Thanos for the first time.
Yes.
Um, yeah, but yeah, the Chitauri. I like, while you were talking, I'm like, oh yeah, those guys. Wait, what were they called? Oddly enough, I had to. My brain went to the front of a Lego box
Oh, nice.
was called Chitauri something, and I was like, oh yeah, they're the Chitauri. It's like, whoa, boy, brains are weird. Speaking of brains, Captain Monica Rambeau has a brain. Worst segue ever. Right. So she finds out. So she wakes up in a hospital
Hmm.
by an empty bed, and it turns out her mother Maria had cancer and had just had surgery. Um, in her timeline, but obviously, 3 years had passed, and what I really liked was, so I kind of was annoyed at the snap being like, narratively and cinematically, it's like this guy disappears, then that guy disappears,
Mm.
and this one, and you're like, no, he snapped, like, and it was a snap. Like, you'd think it would just be like, poof,
Yep.
but obviously you see like, Nick Fury disappear, and then someone beside him who watched him in a gas disappear, right? But we see people fading in the same way, so I like that.
Mm.
It's consistent, and so Monica's like looking for the doctor, as people are like fading into existence and bumping into her.
Yeah.
And the doctor's like, "Your mom died 2 years ago, a year after you disappeared." And we cut to Monica returning to work, with acting director Tyler Hayward, who turns out, her mom was not just her mom, as the mom of a captain of Sword, but actually the head of Sword.
Yep.
And her mom had a very clear plan for people to return from the blip, and so she has to be sort of on the sidelines of the big stuff,
Hmm.
just because we don't know what recovering from the blip means. That was her mom's order, so she goes to a random FBI report essentially. But then we get back to Agent Jimmy Woo, uh, who was in Ant-Man.
Yep.
Yeah. And he's looking for a missing persons case with these confused sheriffs, and something's weird in Westview, and no one seems able to go in,
Hmm.
but they seem to be able to approach it more than everyone else has been able to, and that's when they discover this hexagonal static CMBR field,
Hmm.
cosmic. I can't remember what CMBR stands for. Um,
It doesn't matter.
It's cosmic microwave background. Thanks, Wikipedia, but I forgot that you could hover over links now and get a brief
Nice.
bit. Yeah. And then Monica like sends in a drone, and obviously that correlates to the helicopter
Hmm.
that was in color, in the previous episode, and then she like wanders in to try and figure things out, and that's how we find out. So that closes the loop on why Geraldine arrives and doesn't have a
Yep.
home or family, because people like, clearly the field was preventing people from approaching, and for whatever reason, Monica could get in.
Hmm.
And but obviously her world wasn't, like, Westview was remade in sitcom form, and she wasn't part of the plan, which is why she's this outlier.
Yep.
um so then we also re-meet Darcy Lewis from Thor,
Hmm.
the intern, but now full-on scientist. And
Yep.
I'm sorry, having being an academic, there's so much shit around, like, people not calling women or female presenting uh, PhDs doctor or professor, calling them Miss
Yeah.
Blank
Yeah.
or their first name and stuff. And so it's a thing. It's a real thing that like this happens. And it was just such a lovely line to see this FBI director or someone be like, "Ah, Miss Lewis, you're here," and she'd be like, "Dr. Lewis,"
Mm.
because she's been hired as a scientist. Fuck you. And
Absolutely.
it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a one-off line, but obviously, I know enough people who have had this happen to them that it was
Mm.
like, fuck yeah, good writers, just solid detail. Like it's also some flavor to show that she's got some spunk and is willing to do things her own way, but it's like a real situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Reintroduces her as well in a good way
yeah,
because she hasn't been in. Was she? Was she even in Thor 2? I think maybe she
maybe two, but
was,
not
but
three,
not 3.
obviously.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
she hasn't been in the Marvel universe for a number of
a minute.
years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and of course she's because it's a cosmic because she's an astrophysicist. Because it's a cosmic field, she's the most sciencey scientist. She immediately gets ideas. Uh, so she studies the phenomena and discovers broadcast signals from the sitcom WandaVision. So we discover that basically the CMBR field is sending out basically a tone that she can tune into with a CRT television,
Mm.
which she figures out because science. And that's what WandaVision is. So for whatever reason, the anomaly is sending this syndicated show out, and so when that, then we understand that episode 2 when we saw like someone moving their hands, a female hand by a monitor watching WandaVision, that was Darcy.
Yep.
uh and she theorizes that they could ride the radio waves back and contact within
Mm-hmm.
the device, and at this point all they know is that Wanda and Vision are there, which is strange because Vision's not alive.
Mm-hmm.
So Darcy and Jimmy unsuccessfully attempt to use the radio to contact Wanda. Um, uh, yeah, sorry. I got confused when I was reading this because, of course, we just talked about Now in Color. I'm like, wait, that already happened. But of
Yes.
course, this
Yeah.
is parallel to the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, and that's the clever
And
thing about it, isn't it?
yeah,
That they do run it parallel to kind of all of the things that are going on. So you see it from that first episode being kind of broadcast, and that is what they pick up on first. So yeah, it kind of it doesn't shift the timeline as such. It just takes you back a little bit and runs
yeah,
you back through all of those real world kind of things that are happening, not inside the hex, that around the town sort of thing, or happening in
yeah.
WandaVision.
And it's mostly the clues from the second episode that are recast, like
Yep.
the helicopter drone was the beginning of episode 2, but also so basically when they ride the radio waves, that's when we heard Jimmy on the phone talking to Wanda after the talent show or before the talent show,
Before the
whatever,
talent show,
that we got the
when
cut in hand.
yes, yeah,
Yeah, the who's doing this, and then the lady from Buffy, I can't remember
hmm
her character's name, um like being really freaked out and snapping the glass in her hand and getting cut and like red blood showing up.
yep,
So that's when they were Darcy and Jimmy were doing the thing. Uh so they use these they also do this other thing which is really cool, is which is now that they have the sitcom, they like do cross they basically take stills from the sitcom and use all the databases on the real world to find out, like DMV, et cetera, to find out who these people are,
yes,
to figure out that these are real people from Westview who have been recast as all kinds of other people.
hmm
Um, and that's when they see Monica as Geraldine. Darcy and Jimmy unsuccessfully attempt to contact Wanda. Then we fast forward to Monica mentioning Ultron and Wanda tossing her out of the town. Uh, and at so on the other side of things is once Wanda threw Geraldine slash Monica out, um, it sort of shattered the sitcom illusion. And
mm.
when Vision comes into the room, we see from Wanda's perspective that Vision is just a husk, like a dead robot with no, like half a brain gone kind of thing.
Yeah, where the stone's been
Before,
ripped from his head, sort of thing, and it's left some
yeah,
kind of
and he
damage. Yeah.
and he's talking, but he seems like zombie robot. Like he doesn't seem actually animated, or animated the wrong way. And then she like uses her powers, and then his face comes back, and he's normal vision. So yeah, so this was a great episode to me. Thought it did the thing that we wanted it to do. Also, I really like how quickly they managed to establish a cast outside.
Yes.
Like Darcy and Jimmy, like the internet stands them so hard. They really
Mm.
like everyone wants a X-Files type Darcy and Jimmy traipsing
Absolutely.
around the MCU.
Yep.
I mean, I do. First time I read that, I was like, shit, yeah. Why wouldn't we do that? That's great. Yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like I rambled a lot around the plot.
I mean, as you said, it was good. It moved quite fast. It gave us a lot of exposition about kind of what's happening, and nicely tied it into the first 3 episodes as well, showing us that real world reaction, introducing the kind of the outside characters, and did it all very well. And I think it showed you that they have no idea what was going on to start with. You know, that progression about how they've learnt these things, the different things that they have tried, you know, sending the guy in through the sewers because they're like, we don't know that this doesn't extend through underground. He's like, but it probably does though, right? So, and they send him through, and obviously he turns into the beekeeper as he goes through the barrier. And there's all those sorts of things, which are was that in episode 4 or was that in episode 5? How was it episode?
Which?
The guy, when they show him going down through the into the sewers.
No, because that happened before Geraldine was thrown out, right? Because that was the end of episode.
Yes. So yeah, we get all of these reactions to what's happening, with them trying to understand what's going on, and it just works very well in tying those 3 episodes together and giving us a roundup, a good point for then the episodes to stop just being here is a sitcom. Now we are crossing through with a little bit of the sitcom stuff and some of the outside reaction and how things are progressing through with that story. So again, where episode 3 was kind of a pivotal moment in understanding different things about the story, episode 4 is kind of a pivotal moment in how the show is sort of framed. And what we're going to get going forward with the last 4 episodes, perhaps, additionally to episode 5, in how they tie up both. Here is the show, and here is the reaction to the show.
Yeah, fully. I also think that it's interesting. So because this is the interruption halfway marker, it's the only episode that doesn't have a commercial because it's not episode about WandaVision.
Oh, yes.
And that, yeah. I really like that because those commercials are very weird and funny. They're just weird. They like, and yeah, they have like, oh, it's the Hydra bath powder or the Strucker watch or whatever.
Yep.
But like, it's mostly just having fun with things.
Yes.
Like both MCU Easter egg, but also this is kind of how weird and hokey commercials were at time period X, where time period is this episode of WandaVision. I'm really looking forward to like the 90s, 2000 extreme, like extreme Hydra drink.
It's interesting. Is it in episode 5 where the advert is for like a paper towel?
Yeah.
But it's not in that 80s, early 90s kind of vibe. It is back a couple of decades, I seem to remember.
I hadn't put that together for whatever reason, but I think you're right. It's Lagos paper towels, which also is like the country.
Yeah, because there's an event. There's Lagos is where Scarlet Witch, I think it's her first mission as an Avenger, and they're chasing the guy from Captain America 2, who is a Hydra agent who was a SHIELD agent. And then they're chasing him at the beginning. And it all goes wrong, basically. And Scarlet Witch does tons of damage, I think. It's a reference to that, I think.
Okay, good. I was like, there must be a reason, but I can't get it. I was sorry, I was scrubbing through the episode, but I couldn't find it. I think you're right though. I think it's like, well, maybe it's 80s.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Yeah, it could be.
Reminds me a bit of the Quicker Picker Upper from Bounty.
Mm.
Anyway, yeah. So I really like this episode. I think it's very clever. It's also really good structuring, right? Because
Yeah.
we know Monica reasonably well
Hmm.
via Geraldine. Like we get like we're at least used to her, but we're getting like 10 minutes of her, and then plus a little bit of Jimmy, and then the last 15 is like Darcy and Jimmy, and in very short order in one episode. It feels like we have enough about these people
Absolutely.
to have a second squad, and
Yes.
making it so like the director is there and there's a bunch of like extras saying the odd line, but like really it's these three people are all the vast majority of the time, despite of this hustle and bustle. Like they figured out just the balance of like when they show the cutting away of the scientists going in the sewers, it's really quite quickly done.
Yes.
It's like they're not they don't spend time developing who these people are. They're just generic scientists
Hmm.
running this test. Also, I love the skepticism is like, and like the like, why wouldn't it go underground,
Yeah.
but responded by like the acting director is like, well, we should check, like just this like, science be damned, I'm gonna try this thing. It was again like a really quick, really well written. Of course the exchange would go that way. This seems dumb, and then of course it is dumb.
Yep.
um I can't remember if we ever find out what happened to Beekeeper Boy,
No, I don't think so because
because we get the rewind.
the cord snaps, doesn't it, when
But
he's
it
going
disconnects,
through?
and the bit that follow, like they reel back in, is like a meter and a half of skipping rope.
Yes. Yeah.
The old school skipping ropes would had the past plastic segments
Mm.
for no reason, which made them clickety clack, but also couldn't be used as anything other than the skipping rope because you couldn't tie them in knots. I remember using those at gym class. Yeah, so this episode was really cool. I liked the idea that it's because it's old school. The idea that you needed a CRT.
Mm. Hmm.
Uh, yeah, just really nice things. And it was enough of an infusion of non-information information, because
Yep.
it really was an episode about how the people in this world also don't know what's going on.
Mm.
Except like you got a notion that we kind of figured it was just a bubble, but now we're like, it's a hexagonal bubble. Thanks, TV show. But I mean, for me, it worked. It was like, yeah, I know enough that, and we, of course, knowing a bit about the comics and knowing a bit about narratives, we like knew that it was like someone's generating this somehow. The big thing, of course, is now that Monica's back, they know that Wanda's the key.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that takes us to episode 5.
It does.
On a
And
very special episode.
talking about the characters, the side characters, at least Jimmy and
Darcy.
Darcy. Kind of, it's really good, the kind of rapport they have between the two characters, especially in going into sort of episode 5. So Darcy says, she says something like, I'm calling it the hex, and saying, everyone's doing that, and you just see Jimmy looking at Monica, just shaking his head, because obviously no one is calling it that, and she's trying to sort of make it a thing. And it's good to see how quickly that relationship and the humor between those two characters, and yeah, you can absolutely see why people want there to be a sort of an X-Files style show with those two in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they are kind of tropey, and that's
little
why
bit.
it works.
Yeah.
Like in that they come off as the like straight laced and quirky pairing, like which is a fine trope, but they don't come off as just tropes.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like the kids in Psycho Gorman.
Yes.
See episode 10 of our show. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I think it works really well, and again, it's just so tightly written. They know exactly how much they need to develop in this short amount of time.
Yeah.
It's actually like remarkable that, I mean, when you take the credits away, this is like 25.
Yeah, it's really short. I know episode 5 was a little bit longer, wasn't it? That was probably closer to 30 minutes, but
yeah. And so yeah, on a very special episode, which again is a classic 80s title. It's the thing that they make fun of on Clone High, for example, which is a great animated show, which you should see if you haven't seen. because every episode it's like on this very special episode. And so in now we're in the 80s. WandaVision are trying to keep Tommy and Billy from crying. Uh, Agnes pops in and offers to help look after the boys, and Vision questions her behavior. I'm going to pause on the thing I've reading here because it skips the integral thing that you were hinting at, which is this is the scene where Vision's like, I don't trust her. Weird things are going on.
Yes, yeah.
And then Agnes goes, "Oh, that's not right.
Yeah, I mean,
Should we
Agnes,
get like
she says,
should we
do you want me to do that again? Do you want me to take that again? And
take it from the top, I think, first.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's interesting in that Agnes has some kind of kind of cognitive thought.
Agency.
She does have a little bit of agency, and it's interesting again seeing her kind of just take everything in her stride through the rest of that scene where we'll talk about sort of the boys aging and that sort of thing. But it's interesting in that sort of way. You're like, okay, so some characters don't understand what's going on. Some characters do have agency, but then there's Vision, who is kind of a bit in between almost. Like he seems to have agency, but also have no understanding about what's going on. And he's sort of then presented through this episode as trying to find these kinds of things out, and it's still the big question mark, isn't it, about how he actually exists?
Yeah, because we know he died from the stone being ripped from his head, and then at the end of last episode, we realized that he's not magically better, but magically better. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I think this is really important because everyone else, so they had like Agnes and Herb had that awkward conversation by the wall where they were like, should we talk about? I guess we can talk about, but Agnes definitely seems in a she seems to be different because she seems to be one. So most of the other people have none of that. Like you were mentioning, the doctor is just like blissfully unaware.
Yep.
People are, everyone else we've seen is kind of just in the world. And Herb and Monica had this, or Agnes rather, had this a bit.
Yeah.
Monica had this brief moment, but we can attribute to that because she was not supposed to be in the show.
And there's
But Agnes seems to be doing a different thing, which is like acting like they're on a TV show.
Yes, yes. She seems to be kind of playing along.
Yeah, but she's playing along to the TV show thing that we know the Hex is broadcasting. But it's still not clear that Wanda is specifically wanting to live a TV show life so much as an idyllic life.
Yep.
And so, like, there's some weird tension between Wanda's got power, she's controlling things, but also is kind of just as confused about the idea of, like, we're supposed to do it this way.
Well, I imagine that relates back to her kind of her upbringing as a a young Sokovian child. I can never remember where Sokovia is meant to be, whether it's sort of like Eastern Europe.
I think it is.
Balkans,
yeah, she has that bad Russian accent, right?
Yes, yes. So whether it's kind of former USSR or something like that. So she has seen, and her idealized version of an American life has been presented to her through these TV shows. And that's why it follows this formula, and why we can understand that she is basically just looking to hide herself away from everything that has happened and live her perfect life, or live what she thinks her perfect life should be, with Vision, with children, and why it takes the form of those TV episodes, because that is what she knows, what she understands, past the life that she has kind of already lived as a child, somewhere completely different.
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't put together that's probably her only exposure to idyllic life as TV. That's a really good insight. Yeah, so then while they're bickering about the kids crying and Agnes's interaction with them, Agnes goes to the kitchen to get liquor for the kids, and then they suddenly are 5 years old. And then we do like a montage kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an intro. It's like an intro
Yeah, that's
to the
right. Yeah,
episode, isn't
it's
it? It's
like
an
a
intro
facts of
sequence.
life
Yeah.
sort of 80s. Yeah, it's like a new credit sequence with them as a family with 5-year-olds.
Mm.
And then we cut to the very wholesome kitchen scene where the boys have been found a dog and we've been bathing it in the sink.
Yeah, not before Agnes is then just as after the boys have changed age. She says something, very sort of tropey about you've got to,
Kids grow
they
up so
go
fast or
fast, yeah,
something.
exactly. But
Yeah.
she's just sat there banging back, whether it's whiskey or whatever it is, just
Yeah.
on the kitchen counter. Like, but I just thought it was brilliant way to kind of finish that scene and then transition.
Yeah,
through.
because she goes in because like this is the 70s is ish, right? 70s because it's like the tail end of the last. Like we're in the bridge between episode 70s and 80s,
Yep.
and that was the thing. You used to give babies liquor,
Yeah.
to calm them down. Just like rub a finger in rum and rub it around their gums, and then they would calm down, or whiskey or whatever, right? And so she goes to the kitchen to do that, and then it cuts to her just like posed lounging on the counter swigging it. They grow up so fast. You're right. Also, I mean there's a perfect point, just sidebar to Catherine Hahn is a fucking gem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
She's so good. I mean, I don't know if you've seen her in other things. She's a very talented actress, but this is her wheelhouse and she's fucking killing it. She's very good in other things that are more serious, but boy, can she just steal scenes as like brassy but not over the top.
Yeah.
But yeah, perfectly cast and she's doing it in subtly different ways, right? She's doing it. It's that trope that's in all these sitcoms, but obviously the trope evolves, and she's just evolving with the sitcom decades seamlessly.
Yes.
Like now she's more boozy because it's the 80s, like that whole thing is just great. Versus like the more in the first episode, she was like teaching. She's like, I've got my catalog of recipes, and it's so easy because I'm da da da. But I'll make jokes about my husband being dumb or not paying attention to me. And then it's like swigging booze and making like cutting one-liners, but still being the same trope.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they decide they ask to keep it. And Agnes comes by conveniently with the like handled doghouse that she's just walking in. I'm like, is that I'm sure that's a thing that existed in the 80s because that sounds like 80s product, but boy, was that a weird looking thing to me. And then we see something sparks in the house, so Agnes is like, name it Sparky. And so then Wanda, like, this is the crazy part. This is like one of the biggest like friction points between Wanda and Vision, right? Is Wanda like, so the kids and Agnes are like just preoccupied with the dog, and then Wanda just goes whoop and makes a collar that says Sparky in the kitchen, and then like puts it on the dog, and then Vision's like, what are you doing? Like, she's right there.
Yeah.
Are you insane? You can't just. She's like, she wasn't paying attention, and he's like, you can't be this like cavalier. Like, we're hiding in a town. And they have this like real like argument about, and where Wanda's like, maybe I don't want to hide anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
And Vision's like, this is messed up. And then the boys go and then the boys also age up to 10 years old because they're not old enough to
have a dog.
The line is, you're not old enough to be responsible for a dog. So like, okay, cool, we're 10 now.
Yep.
We're old enough now, huh? Do we need to be 15?
And it's kind of it's interesting again that the boys have some agency in their form, at least that it hasn't seemed to come from Wanda, that they're the ones that have done it. But again, we don't know how that is possible. The same with kind of like Vision, and the same with how the other inhabitants all have slightly different levels of agency or none at all. There is still a big question about everything in this, what Wanda's actual control over the other things are. And again, with Vision being some kind of sentient corpse, what are these boys as well?
Yeah,
Like what
exactly. Yeah.
we've got no idea. So
But yeah, so then that also makes you question, like, oh, she doesn't seem to want this aging to happen.
mm,
So whatever's imbuing them with this power isn't consciously her. But that explains why they might have just aged so quickly in the womb as well, rather
yeah,
than
yeah,
because Wanda barely understood she was pregnant, but they were progressing it.
mm,
Again, we get this weird tiered set of cognition and agency, and they're like on a different tier than Vision as well,
yeah.
which is interesting. Um, so yeah, so they age up to 10. Uh, then this is the key, I think, one of the key scenes. We cut to Vision at work, and they make another. You just understand computers, and we've got the internet, and
Hmm.
it's like binary. And he's like, electronic mail, and there's the shitty joke about a letter opener. And you're like, I didn't appreciate that. I saw what they're doing, but like people aren't idiots.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe I'm just misremembering how dumb writing was then.
Maybe.
But anyway, so they make it like that felt more like the 50s 60s flat writing than the 80s sitcoms that I've seen. But
Hmm.
um and it's an email from Sword that reveals the situation in Westview, and Vision's like appalled. And the brown guy, I can't remember his name, who talks about the letter opener, his like work colleague that is basically the
Hmm.
only other person who speaks after the one episode with the boss, right?
Yep.
Uh he like breaks through to him, and the guy's like, please help.
Mm.
I have a family.
Yeah.
I'm trapped. And it clearly isn't fun. It's not like I'm in direct physical pain, but I'm in pain.
And
And then
it's
he,
again, it brings up kind of like that interesting point that we had during the Wonder Woman discussion about how Chris
oh god, yeah,
Pine's character just gets put into this body of somebody else. Like, where are these people whilst they're being like controlled or characterized? They don't have. What level of understanding do they have about what is actually happening and going on? And again, on that spectrum of all of these different characters and the agency that they have, some of them just have absolutely none, or so it would appear. But also, they don't know what is happening to them. It's not them being forced to play something out. It's almost like a character has been imposed on them, and their own conscious has been somehow subdued or trapped inside of them. So like
yeah,
super dark about kind of what's happening with that. And I assume, unlike Wonder Woman, we might get some kind of explanation about this because there is this spectrum of all of these different characters and where they kind of the agency that they have. So something at some point will hopefully shed some light on that.
yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly it. There, it the scene played as this is dark and problematic and distressed Vision, so it doesn't. It would be really wild if it wasn't part of what they're going to deal with.
Yeah.
In fact, later in the episode, Vision actually brings it up.
Yes.
Um, so let's say let's. But yeah, I think you're. Let's staying on the topic. I think you're right. Like it wasn't. Our problem with the Wonder Woman thing was it felt like it was papered over, not really well thought out from a modern perspective of what we know. We've evolved social as a society to know about consent and these types of things being bad, and gaslighting and all these things, right? They've
Yep.
been very much in the zeitgeist and in society in general. So it's very weird to not have that acknowledged, especially when it's from a problematic point of view. And here it seems like that's the point, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like what would it mean if you made a bunch of people play your story out because you had a vast amount of power? What would they feel like? There's also is like the notion of like when you're in a coma, you can still hear everything. That
Mm.
scary thing that's
Mm.
been often used in fiction and whatnot. It feels like that sort of, wouldn't that be terrible? That's the, like, I got chills a little, like I don't normally get hit by it, but when the guy, like, good piece of acting, he was just like,
Yeah.
I have a family, please help me. And it's not like he was overdoing it, it's because the whole structure of the show had hinted at this obviously being. We know this is a weird thing, but it hadn't really pushed the audience to be like, "What do you think's going on with these people?"
Mm.
Until these last couple episodes, and this is like they're aware and they don't like it.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that? It's like I think that's horrible. Um. So. Yeah. So. It seems like Wanda's in control of the town because she's doing this, she's doing that. Uh, Sword. So, meanwhile, Darcy figures out something about basically if you can get the right materials, maybe they won't be transformed because where they
Yes.
figure out that the fly pants of Geraldine were actually her Kevlar vest,
Mm.
um, which was a great shoot the pants moment. And so the drone looks weird, but I guess they made it out of old stuff. Is the idea?
Yeah,
It was sort of unclear
I
what
almost
that.
expected to see like a biplane, or
Yeah,
something like that, kind of going in, or an 80s or 70s style car or something, kind of
yeah.
being being
I
put
found
in.
it
But
really strange that it was a drone because drones weren't there, but it looked kind of more like an SR-71
mm,
type, like old, like jet, but was floating.
yeah,
I think that's what they were going for because like modern drones are almost always like roto or like more streamlined. It looked weirdly
it's like a
old,
missile
but
drone, I suppose, isn't it?
kind
More,
of,
yeah,
yeah. Um, and maybe that's what they're trying to do. So it like they try and have a conversation with Wanda, being like, "You have to let it go. These are people, blah blah blah," and she's like, "No, I want this. This is. I just want to be left alone," or some sort of. I can't remember the
hmm
dialogue. And that's when the acting director Hayward says, "Take the shot." Uh, and Monica's like, "Wait, what?"
mm,
In a classic tropey move, but works. And that doesn't work so well. And Wanda fucking just leaves. She's like, "Okay, cool. I'm coming at you," and then
yep,
leaves the hex, and is surrounded by like. So they've got all these guys. They're hip because their laser pointer sights are all green. Um, and she's like, "Leave me alone. Leave my family alone. Don't." Uh, and she's like pissed, and he's like, "We got to like, you can't do this," and she's like, "I'm not gonna ask." Basically, I can't remember
mm,
the line. Uh, and she like uses her powers to get all the soldiers to aim their guns at each other, and
yeah,
she's like, "Aha!" And then storms back in. And then we rejoin the show to see that Sparky ran off after being scared by the drone.
hmm
Uh, and that's when it's revealed. That's when we see Agnes holding Sparky. And it turns out Sparky ran off and hid in a bush and ate the azaleas, which are apparently poisonous,
sure,
I guess.
yeah,
Um, and the kids who are 10 still are like, "Bring him back, Mom. Bring
yeah,
him back. You can bring him back." And Vision's like, "What do you mean?" And Agnes is like, "You could do that?"
mm,
Uh, yeah. Somewhere in this episode, I can't remember where, we see that it's revealed that they found security footage from where Vision's body was being held
yeah,
and dismantled or whatever.
hmm
Whatever his will and testament was, get rid of me so no one can make a bad Ultron,
yes,
essentially. And then she stole the body
hmm
a day or two before Westview happened. Um, so like we get our confirmation that fucking Vision's being reanimated.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then yeah, so there we are. They're like doing that, and the kids hint that they'll age again. She's like, because they're sad. She's like, basically she says, "We can't do that.
yeah,
Sometimes dead things have to stay dead."
hmm
And there's this after the tension of, well, you made, you could do that, question mark. And then she's like, "You cannot age out of this. This is a thing you have to live with.
mm,
It'll happen anytime." And there's this wonderful, poignant moment that it seems like everyone there understands that she didn't do that with Vision,
yeah,
which is strange. She's like, "The kids know their dad's dead."
Well,
Um,
again, it suggests what can the kids see? Like, can they see
yeah.
through the facade of what Wanda is kind of throwing up?
Hmm. Um, and Vision comes home. They're at home, and Vision's like, "What the actual fuck are you doing, Wanda?" And he is pissed. And they do. I think it's our little thumbnail
Yep.
on the bottom right. If you're watching this on the on video, they have their like very like we're on two wires on a TV set. Yoink! I thought it was so hilariously low budget, and I loved it because they just both fall into this superhero pose with their arms out, being like, "I'm flying at you because I'm mad. I
Yep.
can fly at you because I'm mad." And it felt very perfect because it felt like it was a bad flying effect in an '80s show, even though their powers outside of the show. Like, it kind of made sense. It worked better than if they put more effort into if they were like brandishing their powers as if they were in an
Absolutely.
MCU movie. Like, I
Yeah.
think it kept the vibe right. And like Vision and Wanda are arguing, and she's just like, I just basically I want to be happy and like don't. And he's like, what? I don't remember who I am. I don't remember anything before Westview. What is going on? And he is distraught because of
Yeah.
course he has this entire whole of his life and it's this existential terribleness. And he's like, I just remember you and here and the kids. And she's like, isn't that enough? From her position. And like, it's such a shitty thing to ask. Like, aren't you happy with your wife and kids? It's like, well, that's like gaslighty abuser type tactic, right? Like, it's bad.
And he says something like, you know, you're controlling all of this, but you can't control me. And she responds to the vein of, oh, can't I?
Yeah,
You know,
she like it's like it's
very
not actually an eyebrow raise, but it's like, which again we know he's dead.
Yeah.
So we're like, how much of this is puppeteering, right?
And we've
Just
talked
a
about this through all of the episodes. You know, that in the first episode where no one was helping his boss when he was choking until Wanda said, "Vision, help him," and he instantly did. You know, there's those kinds of things still, those little threads that came up early, which are leading. I don't know whether it's going to lead to Wanda doing something to Vision, or it's just this overhanging kind of thing until things are explained.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll wrap up because the episode recap, because it'll walk into the last segment. Of course, is what do we think is going on?
Yep.
Which is while they're arguing, the doorbell rings, and Wanda opens the door and looks at this dude, and she's like, kind of confused. And we know who it is. If you've watched other franchises from Marvel properties, but I think the best line is Darcy is watching and she goes, "She recast Pietro?" And then it cuts back. He's like, "What?" In his like bad Jersey accent,
Yeah.
Pietro's like, "What? You don't like your long lost brother or whatever?" And then who's this chump? And he meets Vision, and it's so in the MCU, Quicksilver died in Age of Ultron. And it sucked because he had like some really cool scenes, and like a lot of people really liked that performance, and but it also worked in that film. But of course, the same year we had a Quicksilver in the X-Men franchise, which was owned by Fox at the time, which of course now is owned by Disney. And Pietro was recast because they took X-Men Quicksilver, who's the son of Magneto, and they put him in WandaVision.
Yeah, and it's, I mean,
and I have a grin.
I mean, I loved it. I absolutely loved that it was him, and I thought, oh, it's the guy. You know, they brought him back because they shot it from behind, and it looked like his hair.
Quicksilver, silver hair, yeah.
And then, but there's a point where it cuts. I don't know whether it cuts to her face, but then it cuts back behind him again, and he's slightly different. So the hair, I picked. I don't know whether it is, but it looked to me like it was the actor from MCU, from Age of Ultron, Aaron something.
Yeah. I can't remember.
And then when it cuts back, it then his hair looks slightly different. I don't know whether I'm just
Making it
putting
up.
that on, putting my own thought on that, but it was very clever because there was a point for me before they showed his face where I'm like, oh, it is different. It's gonna be someone.
Yeah, I think actually it was probably the same guy, but what they did was they had a really, the first shot was like focus wasn't on him; it was blown
Yes.
out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then it showed a clearly. Then the next shot was like much more of him was in focus. You could tell he had a different build, and it was what's his name? I forgot the name of the actor. Evan Peters.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very clearly Evan Peters. I actually, because it had been so long since seen either of these, I was like, wait, is it? And I hit pause
Kim
and I
did
looked it up,
exactly
like,
the same
I'm
thing.
pretty
Yeah.
sure this is the other one. Yeah, okay. I'm not going crazy.
Kim
There's
had
so much
exactly the same. Kim had exactly the same moment, and I just sat there and I actually said, "Oh, holy shit!" When it cut to him, like that was my reaction to that. And Kim's like, "Is it? Yeah."
Yeah. Yeah, that worked way better than the Luke Skywalker reveal for me. I mean, obviously not all the feels, but I mean,
Yes.
also like in the terms of that was a reveal, while like the Luke Skywalker one is like, if you're paying attention when you like we talked about in the Mandalorian episodes, like you see the lone X-wing, you're like, it's Luke, and then you see the cloak in the hand, and then you're like, it's Luke. You see the hand, you're like, it's Luke, and like, yeah, that's still, but it still works. And this is like the opposite. This is like, I fucking didn't see that coming.
Absolutely.
I didn't see Pietro coming. I definitely didn't see what it means for the X-Men universe to be recast. Like, oh, of course, multiverse. There are no mutants in Marvel MCU.
Yep.
But I bet there will be after the next thing because collapse.
And again, House of M
Wolverine fight the Hulk.
kind of storylines and all of these Scarlet Witch storylines kind of converging in on this and how that's going to expand out. So.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was sort of sandbagging earlier when I said this feels like a pivot point between like major MCU things, stories, right? It's like the next one we know is multiverse related. We know that for various reasons, from casting and announced titles and stuff. And this is like also they're taking it seriously because they own all the Fox stuff again, and they're not going to reboot it. They're actually really contemplating reusing chunks of even after the pitiful Dark Phoenix stuff. Now you're like, shit, are those actors still gonna? Are they gonna come into the MCU? Are they gonna recast some of them? They can kind of go a little wild, but it really seems like they're thinking. So like, Dark Phoenix did terribly, but people still like that cast,
right?
Yes, and Apocalypse. Sorry, yeah, but the reason why people still went to Dark Phoenix was kind of like that cast worked really well for a couple of movies, and then really poorly for a couple of movies. Now you're like, well, are they gonna do it? Like, are we gonna have? Although at the same time, I wouldn't like. I like Hugh Jackman, but I wouldn't mind a new Wolverine. I hope they do a bit of a mishmash, like just takes some things.
I'd actually like to see what's her name, Laura Kenny? Is that the character's name? X-23.
From
Logan.
Yeah, although Logan takes place in the future.
Yeah, Logan's a bit of an odd one. Even in terms of the X-Men stuff that was going on.
I mean, but that's why it worked, right?
Yeah,
it's also why like Deadpool got green light because you could do R-rated superhero films, and Logan was the gamble.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've crossed the hour barrier a bit ago, but a couple things I want to touch on. Obviously, we could go on and on about our theories of and hopes on what this means for the bigger, wider stuff. But if we shrink down, I think there's a theory on what's going on in this show, and I want to talk about what you think is going on in this show and what might happen in the next 3 episodes.
Okay.
And then I will hear yours, and then because I stumbled upon an article, and then a couple people have had this take, and I find it interesting, but I want to spoil you with other people's stuff.
Sure.
So I'm curious what you think is. about the
Oh,
show.
I mean, well, I still come back to the idea that we almost had in the first discussion that it's part Wanda, part something else. And Wanda has tried to create, and at least we know now that she wants this kind of idealized life. She's tried to create this sort of like haven for herself, and whether it builds into more comic kind of things where she is creating somewhere for people to be,
Mm.
and we start to see other characters, whether it's across the multiverse or stuff, come into that because there's something else at play within that, or maybe she just doesn't quite grasp her powers. There was a comment, or a chat between, it kind of in the real world, and Jimmy said something. Oh no, maybe Kat Dennings said she could have destroyed that. Like she's powerful enough that she could have taken Thanos off by herself.
Mm.
And then Jimmy said something about Captain Marvel being the one who was more powerful. Anyway, there is this obviously mass of power within her. So it may be that there's something else at play, or that there's just all of these other ramifications that she cannot control from what she is doing. They're kind of my two
Main
things,
theories.
main theories. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we know from the comics, right? We did like, the House of M, the like destroy, like no more mutants or never again, and like Wanda's perverse, like if I get rid of all the mutants, they can't all die. Um, move, right? And we know I can't remember what her powers are in the MCU, but like she somehow absorbed the telekinesis. They said this in the episode that like something gave her the powers that she didn't always have them. Telekinesis in flight. It doesn't really matter, so I won't look it up. But like, it's the mutant power of changing reality.
Yes.
And in early X-Men, it was like in small ways, and then when they did the thing, which is great, which is like, well, if your mutant power is changing reality, then you could kind of maybe you're one of these S plus class mutants, can kind of fuck the universe
Yeah.
over,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like they're playing into that tension here. It's like, what are the depths of her power? And they're playing that again. We don't know for this version of the character what they are. So, despite the history of the comics, they're doing a really good job of like, we're in the same state as Sword, kind of like as the audience. Like, what can't she do? I mean, she keeps doing these things. She's rewinding time, right? Like, she's sure powerful, and it's definitely her in control to some degree. She has awareness. She leaves the hex. She clearly knows the hex is a thing that she's living in.
Yep.
But I think it's a misdirect.
Okay.
Or rather, I think something else is going on, much like you did. I've always thought that because it's too straightforward. But this is the theory. Agnes. The theory is Agnes is very reminiscent of. Let me just find the name of the. I had this up. Why? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I opened the wrong tab. Of a character named. God, why am I terrible at this? I had it open. Agatha, is that right? Hold on, No, give me a second.
I'm trying to think through my mind who it could be. I mean, her being a character, and I assume you're going to bring up a named character that's got powers in some way. That would explain her agency, I guess.
Yeah.
Who would that be? You're going to name a character I've never heard of now.
Agatha Harkness.
Yeah, you've named a character I'm not familiar with.
Yeah. So that's why, because I hadn't heard of her either. So the key there is Agatha Harkness was in Scarlet Witch's past. Agnes has a pendant
right
on her necklace, which looks exactly like Agatha's.
Oh, right, okay.
Agatha.
The name's very close.
Yeah. She also, basically is. I'm just gonna look up Marvel Wiki. um, is a like a witch type character,
Right. Okay.
uh, who has dealt with the Scarlet Witch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so she comes back to say, let's see, so Wanda captured some energy from some stuff and made which was from Salem Seven Witches,
Right.
which made her pregnant with her kids. Later, Agatha resurfaced and claimed that the Scarlet Witch's children were actually fragments of the soul of Mephisto,
Oh.
and wiped Wanda's memory of her children rather than fight to free the two from Mephisto when he reabsorbed the two.
Right.
So in the comics, the kids come from an interaction with Agatha, and Agatha comes back and basically removes them from the universe.
Yep.
So the fact that she has this pendant and she has this weird awareness, the theory is maybe she's pulling the strings, like, or there's a deal with Mephisto where I want my husband back, I want my bubble. She's controlling the bubble to a certain extent, but like we're all playing our parts.
Yes.
And Agatha represents like the Mephisto connection or something, such that that's why. But she's still part of the but she's part of the outer layer of the hex, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So she's playing the role of someone who's playing the role to keep her happy because that was the deal, kind of thing. Which is why she talks to Wanda and says, "Oh, should I take it again?" That type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think the pendants is a big one because those things don't happen accidentally, and the fact that it's a pendant of someone who has a similar name, who was intimately involved in both the beginning and end of her kids. I think that's the thing that sealed it for me when I read that.
I was just having a quick look on IMDb about the Doctor Strange film Multiverse of Madness, just to see who has been cast in that, just in case there was a Mephisto connection there. But there's not. There's a character called Mordo, who I'm unfamiliar with.
It's a different person.
Yeah. But that's kind of there's nothing else that apart from Wanda being in that as well. Yeah, not. Let's see.
Yeah, so I thought it was just a really nice. Like it played to exactly our suspicions of it's Wanda plus, but also my growing suspicion over these past 3 episodes rather of I feel like something is up with Agnes more so than the others, and I think part of that is like she seems more aware. The other part is like Wanda seems more comfortable with letting her witness things.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agnes seems to be this character that Wanda has. It maybe not quite a familiarity with, at least as it comes across, but someone who she isn't trying to hide things from, unlike the other characters, and the one that she, very quickly became friends with, and is that main kind of like sideline character. So,
yeah. So that's, I mean, the thing I wanted to float, which was because it played into our previous conversation, but also had so much like I don't know much about Wanda and Vision from the comics, except for like the big triggering House of M was a thing. So I'm now more convinced of that, although it would be so normally I would say it'd be wild if they brought Mephisto in because like the devil, but he's kind of a big deal in Doctor Strange.
Yes.
So it's like, fuck, yeah, maybe they are going to go there. It'll be like the Demon Dimension kind of thing.
Yeah.
That place that, what's her name from the New Mutants?
Magic, yeah, Anna Taylor-Joy
jumps in and out of. Yeah. But yeah, so I was like, and that makes me it's already bonkers, but if they like bring Deal with the Devil bonkers in, I am here for it. But so what I think what it'll be, I think, was giving us a modern explanation of the stupid mystical demon dimension that's hard to deal with
Mm,
because it was like 60s comic book nonsense, right? Is by making it actually the demon dimension.
yeah.
And like then Mephisto's just a guy who can control access to the dimensions, and that
Hmm.
explains where he plucked Pietro from,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
or Agnes, or like whoever is doing this. But this is
Absolutely.
why
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like it's like again, this is also why when I read that, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely setting the stage for not just because of Pietro, but just like, oh, you're hinting at other powers, maybe. Oh, this could be a real juicy for getting people hyped for the next chunk of
Definitely.
MCU
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff, right? So yeah, I'm pretty pumped.
Mm.
Um, cool. Do you have any last thoughts on the show?
No, I think I can. I'll close with sort of my opening thoughts. Really, I'm a little more invested, and I'd be super interested after these episodes to see where it goes. What the second half, almost the second half of the show has, and how that builds and leads into the into phase four.
Yep, me too. I was gonna say, that last scene did a lot, but I think the
Absolutely.
whole episode did more. It wasn't just, oh shit.
Hmm.
It was like that episode already had me like wanting to. I was like, oh, it's over halfway through. Shit, I'm gonna want to watch the next episode, and then I just kept doing more reveals and then the big one was obviously a big reveal, but it was nice that I didn't feel like it was like a what a twist sort of that's wild, but also the rest is kind of hollow.
Yeah,
Like I'm
absolutely.
more invested in the show after, especially after episode 5, but also I felt the same after episode 4.
Uh huh.
I'm I really hope, like we talked about before, that this stays as a one-off season, and that like they're gonna spin us around for a couple more episodes and have a for this narrative arc something satisfying to close it.
Mm, mm.
Whether it's still open-ended off, like something that tells us one division's over. Uh, I mean, it's going to leave a bunch of doors open because obviously MCU. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
Is everything leaves doors open. But I really hope it like is clean, and makes me feel like I watched a show
Yeah, absolutely.
while also, hyping me for the next thing.
Mm. Nice.
Awesome. Well, that's us for this week. If you have opinions on WandaVision or other things you want us to talk about, we do
Mm.
this on a weekly basis. Kind of, we track shows that are in the zeitgeist, like The Mandalorian and WandaVision, and new things like The New Mutants and Psycho Gorman. But we also will watch older things, as is our whims and wants. But if you have
Yes.
something you want us to chat about, or your thoughts on things we've chatted about, you can reach us at Out of Lives Net on Twitter, podcast at outoflives.net on the emails. Ben's at Nova_47. I'm at the Omniarch. You can catch all of the articles, podcasts, VODs, etc. at outoflives.net or on our YouTube channel for the videos content, Out of Lives Network, and of course here on Twitch, if that's where you're watching us currently, at twitch.tv/Out of Lives Network, where we record this show live at noon on Mondays, British Standard Time. We record Tanked Up, the beer and video game podcast, on 8 o'clock on Tuesdays, though this week it'll be pushed back.
Mhm.
Check Twitter for details. That you can also email, catch that show at tanked_up_cast. No more underscore. I got rid of that like a year ago, didn't I?
Yep. A while back.
I shouldn't have added it. It was fine. It was doing fine. I take a look at a new game. First looks at new games on Twitch, Tuesdays at noon. Ben plays a game. I sometimes play along. Usually sit along at least on Let's Play lunches on
Mhm.
Wednesdays at noon, and Radari has the Insomnia streams at 10:30 on Fridays. And Dorian says hello. I don't know if the Meg caught that, but
I didn't quite hear him, but I saw him
okay,
moving around
fair enough.
earlier,
Yeah.
stretching out and getting comfy,
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
such as the cat life of a cat. Yeah.
yeah. That's a cat. I'm petting a cat with my finger. Nope, very bad at this. Anyway, sorry, I'm distracting myself. For this week, I've been Aadil.
I've been Ben.
Bye.
See ya.
www.outoflives.net.